Why has Taskmaster said that he will go to great lengths to avoid copying Deadpool's fighting style, despite Deadpool being one of the most effective hand-to-hand combatants in all of Marvel Comics? Today, we get to break down one of my favorite parts of Marvel lore. Deadpool's physical prowess in battle is a disturbing hybrid of incredibly violent and extremely jovial. This comes together to make an incredibly dangerous fighter. Deadpool is not concerned with subduing or stopping his opponents. He does not hesitate to kill anyone that may choose to face him without losing a minute of sleep over any event. In fact, Deadpool seems to take a certain amount of joy in killing his enemies. He is proficient in a variety of different weapons, including his iconic katanas, as well as an expert tactician in most known firearms, and so much more, making him one of the deadliest mercenaries on the planet. Despite this, however, Taskmaster refuses to copy Deadpool's fighting style, despite mimicking the likes of Steve Rogers, Bucky Barnes, Shang-Chi, the Iron Fist, and so many other hand-to-hand combatants with varying styles and methods. So today, let's explain why. What about Deadpool does Taskmaster find outright terrifying? First though, we have to address who Taskmaster is. Taskmaster, otherwise known as Tony Masters, was a S.H.I.E.L.D. operative who was born with the uncanny ability to evaluate and mimic the movements and fighting styles of others, which has made him a very quick learner and a very skilled fighter. Tony Masters has soared through the physical training requirements of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s training program, and when he was formally inducted, he injected himself with a black market replica of the Super Soldier formula. It's important to note that this isn't the full Super Soldier procedure, but instead, it was someone's best attempt to replicate it, with the perfect one being the German variation of the serum. So it's important to remember that this was an imperfect replica. While this didn't bring Taskmaster to the levels of the original procedure, it did augment his agility, his strength, and his reflexes, and it's stated that physically, he's comparable to the likes of Daredevil in terms of what he can survive. Daredevil has been compared to an Olympic-level athlete, as long as heroes don't have any sort of superhuman powers, and the Taskmaster can mimic their movements by just watching them perform. What this did, however, is completely open his mind and allowed his brain and memory to fire on overdrive. Taskmaster developed photographic reflexes and a perfect recall that bounded to his sense of muscle memory. So most of the time, Taskmaster doesn't even have to think about what he's doing to mimic another fighter. His brain is basically an organic computer that can store as much visual information as possible and as much as he wants, and Taskmaster can simply respond to any given situation with whatever reflexes has been programmed in his brain prior by watching other fighters. He can bring up what he's seen in a moment's notice in any situation. So what about Deadpool? Deadpool does not have a fighting style that Taskmaster is comfortable with using, since he has a blatant disregard for his own safety, causing Taskmaster to be outright terrified because his reflexes would not care about his body during the actual fight itself, and Taskmaster essentially becomes a massive threat to his own safety. Deadpool's healing factor means that he does not need to concern himself with defense at all, just so much as focusing on getting everyone else around him down and dead. He can lose limbs, be impaled, get blown apart, or endure any other manner of injury, and always come away perfectly fine. We've talked in length about some of the most extreme conditions that Deadpool has survived, but that doesn't account for the ridiculous amount of general maiming that he has to go through on a daily basis. And needless to say, Taskmaster is not a fan of this, as his healing factor is nowhere near as proficient. Taskmaster doesn't want to adopt a fighting style that will cause him to lose limbs and be killed simply because he forgoes all defense in favor of brute strength and brutality. It's important to remember how much autonomy Taskmaster has from his instincts, because sometimes he is running on autopilot completely without any conscious effort to decide what he is doing. This, in itself, is a major flaw. If his body subconsciously was to too thoroughly learn Deadpool's style, all it would take was one slip-up or one uncontrolled reflex, and he would be dismembered and would not heal the same way that Deadpool would. He can't just isolate all of Deadpool's offensive maneuvers and blend them with someone else's defense, at least not easily. With Taskmaster and his reflexes, it's often all or nothing. If he were to fight someone like Deadpool, he may not realize that his defense is slipping until it is far too late. This is also a very similar attitude towards his relationship with Moon Knight, who has a similar approach. Even though Mark Spector cannot heal nearly as well as Deadpool can, Moon Knight is known for his multiple personalities, but for this, we'll specifically be focusing on the fighting style and approach of Mark Spector. Oftentimes, Mark is the one that does the most fighting, and has the most information that Taskmaster could mimic if he wanted to. Stephen Grant is usually a bit more of an intellectual, and Jake Lockley is a bit more brutish, and doesn't come out quite as often as Mark Spector does. This is all to say that when Moon Knight is suited up and prowling the city for combat, Mark Spector is usually the default personality who is in control. When Mark fights, however, he favors an approach that relies on him getting hit so much, more than is necessary for a few different reasons actually. First is that Mark Spector is not entirely mentally stable, and specifically, he is something of a masochist. He likes to let people break their hands on his face and tire themselves out by exerting too much effort on trying to take him down. This means that he has an incredibly high constitution based on his complete indifference and desire to endure pain. Taskmaster is a fantastic fighter, but he's also a smart enough strategist to know that each of these fighting styles do not mesh with his skill set, any more than trying to mimic the strength of Thor or the reality warping powers of the Scarlet Witch. It simply doesn't make sense. His human body still has limits, and he has to take this into constant account. His autopilot is also a major danger to himself. This is why the people that he does gravitate towards mimicking are extremely well-rounded combatants that understand the discipline behind fighting intellectually. A great example of this is Captain America, who himself is certainly not afraid of being hurt, but he is a much smarter, more tactical fighter than either of the other options. Copying Steve Rogers gives Taskmaster a guaranteed defense, tactical offense, and overall, a much more effective approach to combat that grants him long-term benefits. But his powers go even further. He can look at characteristics that belong to Hawkeye and Bullseye, and even successfully mimic their marksmanship. This gives him a long-range advantage with different projectiles that don't require him to have any sort of superhuman augmentation. He can mimic the swordsmanship of the likes of the Black Knight, and put his focus into much more disciplined efforts, all of these characters being much safer. These characters are all at the limits of what a normal human is capable of, and they do not rely on any powers that Taskmaster cannot utilize. This makes them the perfect targets for him to copy. It's even gotten to the point where these become completely instinctual and reliant on just his muscle memory alone. If he gets into a situation where he doesn't think, or maybe have any conscious effort to choose which fighting style he adopts, he can let his instincts fall back on a more unstable choice like Deadpool or Moon Knight. Characters that don't have a ridiculous healing factor or complete disregard for their own safety tend to worry more about protecting themselves while also being efficient in a fight. But don't be fooled, Taskmaster is still one of the most effective hand-to-hand fighters and simple weapon fighters in all of Marvel. His affinity for marksmanship, swordsmanship, and hand-to-hand combat comes from some of the very best examples in our world. And even if the likes of Deadpool and Moon Knight are off the roster, he is still extremely deadly. But anyway friends, what do you think of Taskmaster's unwillingness to copy Deadpool's fighting style? And does this make sense to you in the lore? Do you think that he would be worse off for it? Or are there safeguards that he could implement that would make him just as deadly as Deadpool's own style, without risking severe injury? If he were to copy someone like Deadpool and Moon Knight, how long do you think he would last before he was gutted or dismembered? As always friends, thank you so much for stopping by the channel today. Hulk smash that subscribe button for more, and I hope you're having a great one.